Cathaoirleach, and thank you for being here again. I'm sure you're sick of us at this stage. You mentioned, Caroline, that a number of questions have been brought up that are outside the scope of what you're working on right now. And I know last week I mentioned, because I was just trying to understand how the scheme will function in practice. And my point was how the Minister said that he, last year in September, Darragh O'Brien was the Minister, he would hold people accountable who were responsible for all of this. But last week when I brought that up about a register, etc., it's outside what we're discussing now. Is that correct? But it is essentially part of what this bill is about.
Well, it isn't part of what this bill is about. This bill is very much about the scheme and what the scheme is going to do and how it's going to help those who need the funding and the OMCs that need to be helped to do the fire safety and structural and water ingress works that they need to do. So that's what the legislation will do. I don't think it will address the point that you were addressing last week.
And again, I'm new, so I thought pre-leg scrutiny is always to deal with whatever caused the issues, the costs, the risks, and the process, and that's why we have the bill coming into effect.
Well, I think those issues were ultimately considered as part of the working group report that was prepared that led to this particular scheme. And I think it was it Una or John last week who was explaining that there was a multiplicity of issues found with how these defects arose. And that report considered that. It wasn't a recommendation that the scheme that we're bringing forward now would consider it further or make any further provision in that regard. So I'm just trying to separate out maybe what we're here for in terms of what we're building at the minute from maybe if you feel there's a wider political piece that needs to be pursued, that's fair enough. But it was looked at in that report, and I think it was brought home to you maybe last week that there was a lot of different issues that happened there, and it's a very broad piece. So I don't have anything further on that at the moment.
So I suppose what I just want to put on record, the Minister did say there would be accountability. I don't see that accountability, so it's good to put that on record here. Can I ask you, how many developments have unresolved common area ownership that are part of that the bill will address?
How many have unresolved common ownership? I actually don't know, but now that that issue has effectively been addressed by the department, and we have said that that particular criteria will not form part of the interim scheme going forward, nor will it form part, I don't expect to form part of the statutory scheme. So it shouldn't be a barrier going forward.
They're not included in this, or?
As in, that's not going to be a problem going forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my fear again is the Children's Hospital. There was a budget, and then we were saying 1.5 to 2. Now we're saying this 2.5 billion. And I'd hate to be here in a number of years' time. We're saying, how did this turn up at 5 billion? And then the taxpayers in the Cathaoirleach's area are saying, why am I paying for remediation of apartments in Dublin? So does the bill limit that? Have we an upper cost? And I know there are guesstimates at this stage.
We don't have an upper cost. I suppose the point is to correct the defects, and that's what the bill is designed to do. So there isn't an upper limit in the conventional sense of a monetary limit. There will be a reasonable cost to all of the works that we will need to scrutinise on behalf of the public and make sure that the public is getting value for money. So the usual process will apply in that regard. But from a fire safety particularly, it's important that they're done properly, and from the rest of the structural and defects works, they need to be done. So it'll depend on what the competent professional ultimately says is the right thing that's needed here, and a good scrutiny of that by the housing agency, and a decent process which has been, I think, developed and will be put in place through that interim scheme so far.
So they put an upper limit of 2 to 2.5 billion, is that right?
Well, it's not an upper limit, that was the estimate of the cost of the scheme.
So, but there's no margin of error on that it could go way above that?
Well, we have estimates that were prepared in advance of this by the report of how many units were involved. So what I can say to you is you're correct that the estimates were done a couple of years back. I will say there has been inflation, so that's naturally going to have an effect on cost. But other than that, the estimates that we have there were solid at the time. The numbers coming forward haven't been as many just yet as we expected. We have 20,000. The numbers, as maybe was discussed on the last occasion, 100,000, but then approximately about half of those already have works done to them. There are some that are already in process and will be dealt with under, not under the scheme going forward, but under the retrospection payments. But there will be others that we haven't seen yet. So it's hard to fully estimate it, but at the moment the estimate that is there is solid, subject to inflation that may have occurred in between.
And that's my fear for you guys as well, in that there's no malice, the figures have been given, but I know that in construction industry, the inflation, I mean, it's a multiple. So you just go, gee, will this 2.5 end up 5 billion? And then it's a bigger conversation. Can I ask you, will the bill clarify the responsibilities and exposure of volunteer OMC directors?
Oh, that is a good question. Apologies, 1 second.
Sorry, in what sense, Deputy? Sorry.
In that, where is their accountability? Where is their responsibility as directors of the OMC, who are volunteers? Because we've had a number of them in.
I think the responsibilities are already in the OMC Act.
Yeah,
Sorry,
they're
the MUDS
covered by
Act.
it,
The
yeah.
MUDS Act is covered by that. I don't think there's a particular reference in the general scheme, but it might be something we might need to have a look at just to see is there anything else we do need to be thinking on.
Yeah, we'd feel it's probably already covered by MUD's legislation and or just general company law and being directors. But it's something we'll actually we'll mention it to our drafter if it needs to be looked at. Just on the estimates of the costings, just to point out that actually the 25,000 per unit is the sort of baseline. Well, what we've discovered in that, and it's probably quite likely that inflation will impact on that upwards, obviously. But in some of the initial pathfinders, we're discovering that the actual per unit cost is lower than 25. So there's a bit of dynamism going on in there as well that could change, you know. So one of the things we're going to have to do in the not too distant future is have a look at revising that estimate and having a look at that on the basis of the information we're getting back from the interim scheme, just for good governance going forward and our own annual budget. So we'll look at that, and just on the just a quick answer on how many multi-unit developments have the common ownership problem. I don't know the exact answer, but I know there was a 30% figure given based on the housing agency survey that they did. So there was at least 30% that may have that problem. But as Caroline said, that's now a moot point in relation to this scheme because it's viewed as not being an obstacle for us to fund.
Okay. And when do you hope the first remediation projects will start? And the reason I ask that is because it's so hard to get personnel in the construction industry. So for people to do this, I wonder how many contractors will be needed, etc. So have you any timeline on that?
So I think the Housing Agency confirmed that the first grant agreement has already been put across the line in the last month, and they're ready to start. I'm not sure if they're on site, but they should be. If they're not on site, they should be very shortly. There's another 2 that should be finalised next week. I'd expect them to get into works in the next few months. There's some others then waiting in the wings that should be progressed very quickly. So a number of them will get up and running in the next quarter. We'll know from there maybe if there's been any information that will inform us further, but I don't have a further estimate than that, other than to say the original report estimated that for everybody to do all of the works was going to be a substantial length of time. And I think the estimate that was originally given was the 10 years.
So we're on the starting blocks.
Yeah.
Who is the responsibility of appointing them?
Of appointing?
Appointing these contractors and that. Where does that all come from?
So in the original interim remediation scheme, the contractors, it was originally done a different way. We're now using a dynamic purchasing system going forward. So going forward, they'll be appointed through that. The OMC will make that application through that, and they'll appoint them going forward.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you.